So I just thought I'd record a piece today where midnight, so it's just turned into Tuesday the 28th December 2015. We've had all the flooding and you don't need me to take some footage of the flooding or show you a bridge that's been washed away or stuff like that. People coming out of their homes, on Sky News, BBC, etc. We've all seen it. There's plenty of footage out there of floods in centre of York, and North Yorkshire now has got it, as well as Lancashire and so on. Cumbria had it first, of course. The statement made by the Prime Minister, though, is interesting. David Cameron, the Prime Minister, came out and he said quite an interesting statement, which probably a few people will be burrowing around with, but the statement was that per capita there's more spending in the north than the south for flood defences. Look, north or south, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to take what he says as something to analyse. So the statement is, per capita there is not more spending in the south. He says it's more in the north than in the south. Now, first of all, per capita is a really important thing, right? Because that is saying there's a pro rata built in there, proportionate is built in there. That's important to realise that. Okay, so I'm going to take one tiny example and show you why what David Cameron said is an incredible distortion. £6 million every year is spent just maintaining the Thames flood barrier. So I'm not going to talk about all the other stuff. I'll go into caveats in a minute. £6 million a year spent just on the Thames flood barrier, which obviously protects London. According to figures from, I think it's the RIBG, they reckon there's 1.25 million people directly protected in London by the Thames flood barrier. If we take that as a figure, so we've got London here as a representative part of the relatively densely populated southeast, and he's really talking about London, you see, when he talks about this, and I'm taking only a small part, just the maintenance budget, £6 million, 1.25 million people. Okay, keep that in mind to one side. We've got York, taking that as a representative sample of the north. We've got a total population in York of 200,000. Now London's got nearly 9 million now. It was 6 million people back in the 1980s, which was the same as the population in Scotland, which is what I remember. But they've got nearly 9 million people now, and that's official figures. It's 8.69 million. It'll be a lot more than that if you take unofficial people who just happen to be resident there. It'll be more than 9 million. Let's call it 9 million. But for our figures, 1.25 million are protected by, I'm saying, 6 million that I've got figures of, £6 million a year, just maintenance, not construction, on the Thames flood barrier. York, it is, if we take it pro rata then, we say that a seventh of the population, which is what 1.25 million is of 9 million, we say a seventh of the population, I'm being very approximate, a seventh of the population in York is protected. So I'm going to call that 30,000 people. Are protected by whatever it costs there, right? If you do the arithmetic, and I've done it, I'll include it in the bottom text part of this YouTube. That's you would have to remember his statement was per capita there is not more spent in the south than in the north. Well, he says actually more spent in the north than in the south of England, right? I've worked it out. And that basically means you'd have to spend, it's due to population and density and so on, but you'd have to spend 43 times as much in York in actual pound terms before you would be able to say, 43 times as much in London in actual pound terms before you'd be able to say that London was having more spent than York. Okay? So what this means is that when the Prime Minister says that per capita there is not more spent in the south than the north, it sounds like there's loads of money being spent in the north. But because the population density is a lot less, and there's economies of scale and there's all sorts of stuff, basically you'd have to spend, just based on the Thames flood barrier maintenance cost, of $6 million a year protecting a certain proportion of people in London. Taking the same proportion of people being protected somewhere like York, you'd have to spend just £1 for every £43 spent in London. Now that's just using minimal figures and official statistics. So that means you'd spend in York £125,000 a year on flood defences. Right, 125,000. Put it in perspective. What's that? 250 metres of tarmac, topping a tarmac road. 250 metres. Would that be 125,000? It's half the price of a decent semi-detached house with, you know, a couple of bathrooms and stuff. So they're willing to spend, basically, as a build cost, it's about the same as building a bog-standard semi-detached house. So what he's saying is, this proud boast, you know, per capita, as much is spent in the north as in the south in flood defence terms. His proud boast, David Cameron, the Prime Minister's proud boast of the United Kingdom, is that he spends about the same as the build cost of a semi-detached, bog-standard semi-detached house to protect a city the size of York. 125 grand. That's really what he's able to say compared to the cost in the south. Now there's caveats galore, so it's even worse than that, because I'm only including one thing, and that's the maintenance cost of the Thames barrier. I'm not talking about the cost worked out in equivalent terms for going back to when it was built, which I think was back in the 70s. I'm not talking about 70s or 80s, early 80s maybe. I'm not talking about the build cost of it factored in. I'm not talking about all the other stuff they do. I'm not talking about hidden costs, which are like every time they build a new London Underground piece of construction, never mind a new tube layout, every time they just do work, they'll be thinking about flood defences and incorporating money into that. I'm not talking about the fact that London will have a contingency fund for floods, which it'll build up, which will be massive compared to what anybody else could possibly attempt. Remember, it's got more of the population and therefore tax base than Scotland, right? So David Cameron's boast is incredible distortion, and I think it's extremely naughty of your Prime Minister to do that. You're spending the half the retail price to a buyer of a really nice semi-detached house protecting the city of York, and you're spending $6 million a year just maintaining the Thames barrier. I'll put the working out. Like I say, you'd have to spend. There's a factor of 43 times difference in spend before you could say that the south is getting more than the north. They've chosen the perfect figure. David Cameron's got a really good actuarial person working this crap out. It's really naughty, it's really a distortion, and people will think about it and in their gut know it's wrong, and when they think about it and see what I've written here, they'll really know it's wrong. So don't believe that nonsense. Thanks for watching and listening.